We are going to work on finding math models by using the computer to plot our data. So in your toolbox, you can see the second thing in our toolbox is data analysis, finding math models. So I'm going to go there so you can kind of follow along in your toolbox. So what we're going to do is we're going to look and see how do we find a relationship between two variables and how do we find the math models for that relationship. Okay? So to do that, we're going to start with a spreadsheet. And in the spreadsheet, which looks like this, we have two sets of data. We have one set of data. We have the height of a stick in the sun and the length of its shadow. And we want to see if there's a relationship, and if there's a relationship, what kind of a relationship it is. So the first column is going to be our data that goes on our x-axis, that's horizontal. The second column is on our y-axis, that's vertical. So to plot our data, we're going to highlight the data as shown. Make sure you include the two titles. We are going to go to the Insert menu, and we're going to go to Chart. That's going to put a chart on our screen. Now, Google is trying to guess what kind of chart we're going to use, and it doesn't always get it right. So let me show you a couple things here that you might need to run into later. The chart type is a scatter plot, and that's what we need. But sometimes it brings up a line chart, and that is not what we need. So you need to make sure you can see your data points plotted on the graph. So over here under chart type, you can scroll down. There's lots of chart types. We're going to use scatter plot anytime we want to look at the relationship between two variables. The other thing you need to check and make sure is that the first column, the height of the stick, is plotted on the x-axis. Sometimes that gets switched. So over here you can see what's on the x-axis. It's the height of the stick. If you click on that, you can change it to something else if it got it wrong or if it switched it, for example. Okay? So this looks good. On the x-axis is the height of the stick. On the y-axis, which they call the series, we have the length of the shadow of the stick. All right? The next thing we're going to do is click on the Customize tab. We need to always make sure that we can see the origin of the graph. So here's 4, here's 2, 0's over here somewhere. It's not showing on the graph. So I'm going to go to horizontal axis here, scroll down a little bit, and there's an option where you can put in the minimum value on the horizontal axis. If I put in 0 there, you'll see the graph adjusts so that now you can see 0, 0. You could also play with the maximum if you weren't happy with what the computer chose, but in this case it looks pretty good. All right, so I'm going to close that. The next thing we want to do is find the math model, the equation of the best line. So this is a bunch of steps, and you can always pause and go back and watch the video again if it's going too fast for you. So to do that, we're going to go to Series. We're going to scroll down to where it says Trend Line, and checking that box will add a best fit line. Scrolling down some more, under Label, we can choose Use Equation. And when you do that, the computer will put the equation for the line right here. So the computer says that the equation of this best fit line is that y, the length of the shadow, equals 1.4 times x plus 1.42 times 10 to the negative 15. Okay? So we're not happy with this equation that it gave us. This is the slope, 1.4. This is the intercept. But we need to write it using our variables. So instead of y, we're going to use L because our y-axis is the length of the shadow. Instead of using x, we're going to use h because on our x-axis we have the height of the stick. So to write our own equation, we need to remember that the slope is 1.4. And the intercept is a really, really tiny number. 1.42 times 10 to the negative 15th is basically 0. So here's what you can do. Look at the graph. If its intercept looks like it's pretty darn close to 0, we're going to call it 0. So we're going to assume that the intercept is 0. So over here where it says Use Equation on the trend line, we don't want to use their equation. We used it to get the slope, it's 1.4, and the intercept is 0. But we're going to go to Custom and type our own equation. So after you go to Custom down here, you can type your own equation. So for ours, instead of y, we're going to have the length of the shadow equals the slope, which was 1.4, times x, which is the height of the stick, and the intercept was 0. So you can see that right here, it put in the math model, the equation, using variables that are appropriate for our problem, L and H in this case. Okay? So once you've done that, we are finished with the series. I can collapse that. I can make it a little easier to read by going to Legend, and under Position, choose Inside. That moves it inside. And I can also maybe make it a little bigger, and I can change its color to make it stand out. Maybe I'll make it red. Okay, so there's my math model. This part here, this length of the shadow, you can't change that, so just ignore it, sorry. All right, we are almost finished. We have plotted our data, we found the math model, we found an equation. We just need to write the title and the subtitle and make sure the labels are correct on the axis. Okay, so all of that is under where it says Chart and Axis Titles. I'm going to start by going to the horizontal axis title. It is height of stick in inches. That appears right here, and you can see that is correct. That is what we plotted on the x-axis. So it has a quantity, the height, and it has the units of measure, which is inches. On the vertical axis, the y-axis, that's over here, we have the length of the shadow in inches, so that looks right. So all we got to do now is fix the title and the subtitle. So I'm going to go to Title, and we need to write a good title. Your toolbox is going to tell you how to write a title. So let's flip back to the toolbox, and you can have your paper open there. If you scroll down here, after the graphs, there's a checklist, and Part E shows you how to write the title. It says the relationship between the y quantity and the x quantity for context. So right here where it says y quantity and x quantity in context, we're going to insert what those are for our problem. So our title is going to look like this. It's going to be the relationship between, now we have to put in the y quantity. So that's the length of the shadow. So the length of a shadow, and now we need to put in the x quantity. That's the height of the stick. The height of a stick, and the context would be for a stick in the sun, for example. Okay? You just want to put what it's about. So there's our title. I'm going to go down here and make it black so it stands out a little bit. So here we go, the relationship between the length of a shadow and the height of a stick for a stick in the sun. That's a title that follows this convention. I wrote the relationship between, and I put in the y quantity first, the length of the shadow, and the x quantity, which is the height of the stick, for sticks in the sun. Okay? The subtitle is going to be our conclusion. And that's going to be up here. So this is going to help you. When we graph our data, it looked like this graph here. When it looks like this graph here, our math model is going to be y equals m times x. So we got L equals 1.4 times h. So that's, we always change x and y, but that's what it looks like. And our conclusion, we're going to say y is directly proportional to x. That's our conclusion. So for our conclusion, which is our subtitle, I'm going to write conclusion, y, which is the length of the shadow, is directly proportional to x, which is the height of the stick. That is my conclusion. And again, I'm going to make it a little bigger, and I'm going to make it dark so I can see it, so it stands out. Okay? And there we go. We have completed the graph. So that's what you're going to do when you want to analyze data. So I'm going to make it a little bigger there. So there is a checklist here you can go through right here to make sure you have everything you need. We plotted our quantities on a scatter plot. We got a straight line. We added a trend line. We changed the axis so we could see 0, 0. We made sure that we had labels, including units, on our axis. We got a good title. We put our subtitle as the conclusion. We have our math model on the graph, and we changed the math model so it has appropriate variables. This last one we're not going to get to for another couple days, so we're not going to worry about it right now. but we've done all the things we need to do for the graph. So this is a complete graph, okay? And that's what it should look like. So you're going to make this one for this lab, and then you're going to try it all on your own. Down here at the bottom it says wires, and right there is another tab with a new set of data, and I would like you to find a relationship between the temperature and the resistance, doing all the things we did here on the shadow lab, okay? So plot the data, find the trend line, find the equation, change the equation. See if you can do that all. And when you get done with that, try to do the bus rides one also. It's slightly different, okay? So there'll be a slight difference there, but see if you can do it. And then we're going to stop for our first lesson. We're just going to do sections A, B, and C, okay? But don't turn your spreadsheet in yet because we're going to do more later. All right? So go ahead and give it a try yourself to do the wires and the bus rides.